The news had spread through London like wildfire. Philip Arlington, the renowned investigative journalist, had been found dead. The strangest detail, however, was that Arlington himself had predicted it 3 days prior in the final edition of the London Sentinel. An article under his byline had appeared, "My Own Murder, a Warning to the Guilty." The piece was a cryptic expose, hinting at a sinister conspiracy lurking in the city's elite circles. It spoke of powerful individuals desperate to keep their secrets buried, of a truth so damning that its revelation would seal Arlington's fate. The journalist, ever the dramatist, had written in his closing lines, "By the time you read this, I may well be dead. But know this, my murderer will leave behind a mark." They do not intend to. True to his words, Arlington was discovered lifeless in his study the morning after publication. The door had been locked from the inside, and his body lay slumped over his desk, a revolver still clutched in his right hand. The police had little doubt it was suicide. And yet, there were details that gnawed at the edges of reason. Chief Inspector Japp had taken one look at the scene and muttered, "Something's off about this, but I'll be damned if I can say what." And so, he did the only thing that made sense. He called in Hercule Poirot. Poirot arrived at Arlington's townhouse on Montague Street just after noon. He was dressed impeccably, as always, his patent leather shoes clicking lightly against the polished wood floor as he surveyed the scene. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, observed the room with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The study was neat, almost eerily so, as if Arlington had been expecting visitors even in death. The single windows bolted shut, the thick curtains drawn halfway, letting in just enough light to cast elongated shadows over the bookshelves. The revolver in Arlington's hand had been fired once. The bullet had entered through his right temple and exited cleanly, embedding itself in the wooden paneling behind him. Poirot stepped forward, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Tell me, mon cher Japp, what of the key?" Japp grunted. "Locked inside with him. Door was forced open when we arrived. No sign of a struggle, no sign of forced entry." Poirot nodded, his fingers playing along the ends of his mustache. Then he gestured to the desk. Arlington's last article was neatly stacked beside his ink bottle, as if placed there deliberately. Beside it sat a cup of coffee, untouched and long gone cold. Hastings, frowning, turned to Poirot. "You don't believe it was suicide?" Poirot's response was measured. "The article, Hastings. This man foretold his own death, and yet we are to believe he chose to end his life willingly? Non. There is something more at play." He turned his attention to Arlington's right hand. The fingers were curled around the revolver, but Poirot bent lower, scrutinizing with intensity. "The grip," he murmured. "It is unnatural." Japp raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" Poirot straightened. Arlington was left-handed. Silence filled the room. Hastings blinked. Japp swore under his breath. "Then that means—" Hastings began. "It means, mon ami," Poirot interjected, "that Philip Arlington did not fire this gun. Someone arranged this scene to appear as suicide. And that someone, I suspect, has made a single mistake they do not yet realize." Japp exhaled sharply. Well, that explains why it felt wrong. But if it wasn't suicide, how did the murderer leave? No hidden passages, no sign of entry. It's a locked room mystery, if ever I saw one. Poirot smiled faintly. Locked rooms are merely illusions, my friend. We must look beyond the obvious. He turned to Arlington's article, lifting it carefully and examining the pages. He wrote that his murderer would leave behind an unintentional mark. Mon Dieu! What if the clue is here hidden within his own words? Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder. But it's just an article, Poirot. Surely if he knew his killer's identity, he would have written it plainly. Poirot's gaze darkened. Unless Hastings, he feared that to name them outright would ensure his death arrived even sooner. Japp crossed his arms. So what now? We question the people he accused in this piece. Poirot tapped the paper thoughtfully. We begin with the question that troubles me most. Why did the murderer believe a staged suicide would be enough to silence Philip Arlington forever? And with that, the great detective set to work. Poirot set the article down with deliberate care, his fingers smoothing over the pages as if the very texture might yield some hidden truth. His eyes flicked once more to the body slumped over the desk before he stepped back, hands clasped behind him. Hastings, who had known Poirot long enough to recognize the glint of deep concentration, waited in expectant silence. Japp, on the other hand, shifted impatiently. All right, Poirot. The inspector grumbled. You're telling me this is murder. That much I can stomach. But you're also saying there's some clue the killer left behind without realizing. I'd like to know what that is before I waste my time chasing shadows. Poirot's mustache twitched. Patience, moaned Cher Japp. The truth, she is like a mosaic, one missing tile, and the whole picture is obscured. We must first ensure we have all the pieces. He moved toward the desk again, eyes sharp and calculating as he surveyed the scene. There was something deliberate about the way Arlington's body was positioned, an unnatural neatness to the way his arm rested on the surface, the gun held so carefully in his stiffening grip. Poirot tilted his head. And yet, he murmured, it is not perfect. No, he reached for the cold coffee cup, lifting it to his nose. Ah, do you smell it, Hastings? Hastings leaned in and sniffed. Coffee, he said, blinking. And quite strong at that. Poirot sighed. You disappoint me, mon ami. Of course, it is coffee. But it is more than that. It is untouched. A man who sits down to work, expecting no interruption, would take at least a sip, would he not? Japp frowned. Could have poured it, and then got distracted. Poirot's gaze slid to the inspector. Distracted, yes, but by what? We are to believe that Philip Arlington sat here, wrote a detailed account of his own impending doom, prepared himself a coffee, then abruptly decided to shoot himself without so much as a taste. No, 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 there is something in this simple cup that tells us more than it appears. He set the cup down and turned toward the bookshelves. They were immaculately arranged, each spine aligned with careful precision. Poirot's fingers danced along the edges before pausing. A thin layer of dust coated the uppermost shelves. but on the third row eye level, a single book was pulled ever so slightly forward. Poirot withdrew it carefully. The Trial of Louis Renault, a notable case from years past involving a high-profile blackmail scandal that ended in murder. He flipped it open. A slip of paper was wedged between the pages, yellowed with age. Read it silently before slipping it into his pocket. Hastings frowned. Poirot, what was that? The detective merely patted his jacket and smiled. A piece of our mosaic, my dear Hastings. Chap, who had been watching with a skeptical eye, let out a breath. Are you going to tell us what it means, or do we have to play along with your little riddles? Poirot lifted a finger. Patience. First, I must know who was the first person to find the body. His landlady, Mrs. Pembroke, Japp answered. She says she knocked with his morning post. When he didn't answer, she fetched the constable on the beat. He forced the door. Ah. Then we must speak to Madame Pembroke at once. Japp called for the landlady, who soon bustled into the room. Mrs. Pembroke was a woman of about 60, with sharp, watchful eyes that flicked between the men like a sparrow assessing a group of unfamiliar visitors. She wrung her hands in her apron, looking shaken but eager to be helpful. Oh, it's just awful, she said breathlessly. Mr. Arlington was a peculiar man, always working late, never liked interruptions. But I never thought, oh, the poor soul. Poirot inclined his head. Madam, you said you knocked on his door with the morning post. Did you hear anything before that? She shook her head. No, nothing at all. That's what troubled me, you see. He's always up by 7. But when I knocked, nothing. Not a sound. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on his lapel. And was the post you carried for him still outside his door when the constable arrived? Mrs. Pembroke blinked. Why, yes. I hadn't moved it. Poirot's expression shifted, his eyes suddenly bright. Es interessant. You see, Hastings? A small detail, but most illuminating. Hastings frowned. I don't see it at all. Poirot smiled. Then let me explain. The post was undisturbed, which means that whatever happened to Philip Arlington occurred before the morning post was delivered. Yet his article only appeared in the newspaper today, published as if he were still alive to submit it himself. Japp stiffened. Are you saying? Poirot lifted a hand. I am saying that someone ensured the article was published after Arlington's death to maintain the illusion that he was alive longer than he truly was. A sharp silence filled the study. Mrs. Pembroke's hands trembled slightly. But that would mean he was already dead before the paper came. Precisely, Poirot murmured. He turned back to the room, his mind assembling the puzzle. Arlington had been silenced, but not before he left behind a message carefully hidden within his own words. Someone had tampered with the timeline of his death, ensuring that his final revelation seemed like a warning rather than a true account of events. But who? His gaze flicked toward the slip of paper he had found in the book. A name. A single name scribbled in hurried ink. Poirot exhaled softly. The murderer has indeed left their mark. And soon, my friends, we shall see it revealed. Poirot slipped the paper into his pocket, his sharp eyes flickering with thought. The name scrawled upon it burned in his mind, like a whisper from beyond the grave. It was not yet time to reveal it, but already he knew this case was far from a simple deception. There were voices yet unheard, and each would add a brushstroke to the portrait of truth. Japp, ever the man of action, exhaled sharply. All right, Poirot. If Arlington was dead before the post arrived, that means whoever set up this suicide. Act had to be someone who knew his habits well enough to get in and out without raising suspicion. Poirot nodded. Exactement. And what do we do when we have questions? Moaned Sher Japp. Japp snorted. We ask the people who might have the answers. The questioning began with Mrs. Pembroke, who was still wringing her hands in nervous distress. She had been in Arlington's employ for over a decade, seeing to his meals and household affairs, though she insisted he was a private man. Kept to himself, he did. Came and went at odd hours, but always left his notes for the printer by evening. I never meddled, just brought his supper and fetched the post. And now, she sniffed, dabbing at her nose with a frayed handkerchief. Now, he's gone. Poirot studied her closely. Tell me, madam, was there anyone who visited Mr. Arlington regularly? She hesitated. Well, there were a few, I suppose. Mr. Howard, from the paper, came now and then. He and Mr. Arlington would talk for hours, sometimes arguing, sometimes laughing like old friends. Then there was Miss Evelyn Carmichael, a young woman who, she pursed her lips, as if uncertain how much to say, was quite fond of Mr. Arlington. Poirot's interest sharpened. Fond, you say? Mrs. Pembroke nodded. Came often, she did. Sometimes with a newspaper parcel in hand, as if she was delivering something personal. And then there's Mr. Langley. Her voice dipped as she said the name. A disagreeable man, that one. He and Mr. Arlington had a row just last week. Japp scribbled the names in his notebook. Langley, Howard, and Carmichael. Well, that gives us a place to start. Poirot, however, was already forming patterns in his mind. Tell me, madam, on the night before his death, did Mr. Arlington receive any visitors? Mrs. Pembroke hesitated, brow furrowed. I heard voices late in the evening. I didn't see who, but there was someone in there with him. The tone wasn't pleasant. It was hushed, but sharp. Poirot nodded, filing away the detail. He thanked Mrs. Pembroke and turned to Japp. Let us speak first to Mr. Howard. If Arlington's final words were printed by his paper, then surely he knows something of value. The offices of the London Sentinel were a whirlwind of ink-stained fingers and clattering typewriters, the air thick with the scent of paper and tobacco. Harold Howard, the editor-in-chief, was a weary man with a receding hairline and ink smudges on his cuffs. He regarded Poirot and Japp with wary impatience. Tragic business, this, Howard said, crossing his arms. Philip was one of our best, but I told him he was going too far. You poke at enough nests, you get stung. Poirot inclined his head. You were close with Mr. Arlington? Howard snorted. Close? The man was brilliant, but infuriating. He never let go of a story. If there was corruption, a scandal, a cover-up, he was like a dog with a bone. I admired him, but I also knew it would get him killed. Japp narrowed his eyes. Did you publish his last article? Howard hesitated. It arrived as usual. A courier delivered it to my office with Arlington's note, same as always. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A courier, you say? Mr. Arlington was already dead by the time it should have been sent. Who delivered it? Howard frowned. I don't know. The boy who usually runs deliveries wasn't in that morning. It was just left on my desk. Poirot exchanged a glance with Japp. The article had been placed to make it seem as though Arlington had sent it himself. Someone wanted his final words in print, perhaps as a warning or a misdirection. Tell me, monsieur, Poirot continued. Who had reason to fear Mr. Arlington's latest investigation? Howard exhaled, running a hand over his face. That's a long list. But if I had to guess? Langley. Rupert Langley, the industrialist. Arlington had been digging into his business dealings, something about money being funneled through false contracts. He'd told me he was close to proving something big, Japp grunted. Sounds like we should have a chat with Mr. Langley. Before they left, Poirot asked one final question. And what of Miss Evelyn Carmichael? What was her relationship with Arlington? Howard's expression turned guarded. She's a journalist. Good one, too. Used to work for us before she went independent. She and Philip were. Complicated. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Complicated. Howard hesitated. She cared for him, I think. But Philip was stubborn. He kept people at arm's length. Still, if anyone knew what he was up to in those final days, it'd be her. With that, Poirot and Japp took their leave. The day was dimming into evening, the London air thick with the promise of rain. As they stepped onto the pavement, Hastings, who had been silent for most of the interview, finally spoke. Poirot, you think Langley had him killed? Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. It is too simple. If Langley wished to silence Arlington, why allow the article to be published? At all. No, there is another layer to this. Someone wanted the world to see Philip Arlington's words, but why? Japp exhaled sharply. Only one way to find out. Let's pay Langley a visit. As they made their way toward the industrialist's grand estate, Poirot turned his thoughts inward. 3 names, 3 voices Howard, Carmichael, Langley. Each held a version of the truth. Somewhere in their words lay the deception, and Poirot, ever patient, was ready to listen as the motor car rumbled along the rain-slicked streets. Poirot sat in quiet contemplation, his gloved fingers pressed together. Beneath his chin, Hastings, ever eager to follow the chase, stole a glance at his friend. I must say, Poirot, this case is getting murkier by the moment. A man writes his own death in an article, yet he is dead before it ever sees print. And now we have 3 people with reason to fear what he was uncovering. Poirot did not answer at once. The rhythmic hum of the car's movement seemed to aid his thoughts, each detail arranging itself like the pieces of a puzzle. At last he spoke. We, Hastings. But observe each suspect. They have a different thread in this tapestry of deception. And yet, they do not weave together so neatly. There is something a gap where the pieces should align. Until we find it, we chase shadows, Jap grunted from the driver's seat. Well, if Langley's as ruthless as people say, I wouldn't be surprised if he ordered Arlington out of the way. The man's got a reputation. We but actions. That we shall see. Poirot's tone was enigmatic as they approached Langley's estate. The house loomed before them, an imposing Georgian structure of stone and glass, standing like a fortress against the encroaching dusk. A butler answered the door, his manner stiff and perfunctory, leading them into a dimly lit study where Rupert Langley awaited. He was a thick-set man with a square jaw and calculating eyes, exuding an air of authority that made lesser men falter. But Poirot, ever unimpressed by grandeur, merely inclined his head. I do hope, monsieur, he said smoothly, that you will forgive the intrusion at such an hour. Langley leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. I don't like games, Monsieur Poirot. If you've come to ask whether I had anything to do with Arlington's death, I'll save you the trouble I didn't. Jap let out a snort. That's convenient, considering he was about to expose your dealings. A flicker of irritation crossed Langley's face. Expose? He had nothing but half-truths and speculation. Arlington fancied himself a crusader, but he was reckless. You think I needed to silence him? If anything, I welcomed his accusations. There's no better way to discredit a man than to let him dig his own grave. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet, monsieur, he did not live to see his final article published. A most unfortunate coincidence, n'est-ce pas? Langley's lips pressed into a thin line. I may not have liked Arlington, but I had no reason to kill him. My dealings are above board, whether he believed it or not. If you want someone with a real grudge, you should look at Evelyn Carmichael. She was obsessed with him. Hastings blinked. Obsessed? I thought she cared for him. Langley gave a humorless chuckle. Cared? Perhaps. But love can curdle into something far worse. They were close once, closer than he ever let on. But Arlington didn't share his life with anyone. He kept her at arm's length, just like everyone else. And she resented him for it. Poirot watched Langley closely, searching for any sign of deception, but the man remained composed, unwavering. Whether he was a murderer or merely a man with a well-guarded secret, Poirot could not yet say date as they took their leave. Jap muttered, You believe him? Poirot gave a small shrug. He is a man of power, but not of passion. If he wished Arlington dead, it would have been done with precision, not in a way that left so many questions. They climbed back into the motor car, and Hastings turned to Poirot with a frown. If Langley didn't kill him, then what about Howard? He's the one who published the article. Ah, Hastings, Poirot murmured. Howard was cautious in his words, but he fears something. Whether it is guilt, or merely the weight of secrets, that remains to be seen. The next stop was Evelyn Carmichael's residence, a modest flat on the outskirts of London. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 30s, her dark hair neatly pinned, her eyes sharp with wariness. She studied them for a moment before stepping aside. I was expecting you, she said, leading them into a sitting room where newspapers lay scattered across the table. I knew someone would come knocking. Poirot's gaze swept the room. noting the half-burned cigarette in the ashtray, the ink-stained fingertips resting on the arm of her chair. A woman who wrote, who thought, who fought against the silence of grief. "You're close to Mr. Arlington," Poirot began gently. Evelyn let out a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Close? I thought so once. Philip and I," she hesitated, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter now, but it does, mademoiselle. For the truth, she does not exist in isolation." What was Mr. Arlington investigating before his death? Her jaw tightened. Langley, for one, but also something else, something he hadn't shared with me yet. He was being careful, more so than usual. He said he was on the verge of something big, but then her voice caught. Then he stopped talking to me entirely. Like he was trying to protect me, Jap leaned forward. "Did you see him the night before he died?" A flicker of hesitation. No, Poirot caught it instantly. Mademoiselle Sylvaus Platt. The truth, her fingers curled into a fist. "All right. Yes, I saw him, but only for a few minutes. I went to his flat, I had to. He'd been avoiding me, and I knew something was wrong. He was nervous, distracted. He said he was running out of time." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Running out of time? Très interessant. And did he mention his article?" She shook her head. "No, just that he had sent something to the paper, something important, and that if anything happened to him," she hesitated. "He told me to look in his study. He said I'd know what to do." Poirot straightened. "And did you?" Evelyn looked away. Yes. But whatever he hid, I wasn't the only one looking. The study had already been ransacked when I got there." Jap cursed under his breath. "Someone got to it first." Poirot, however, only smiled small, knowing. "Oh, but perhaps, mademoiselle, you saw something. A name, a word, even a scrap of paper." Evelyn hesitated, then slowly reached into her pocket. She withdrew a torn slip of paper, the ink smudged but still legible. Poirot took it, reading the single word scrawled across it. Veritas. A chill settled over the room. The Latin word for truth. Poirot's voice was a murmur. "Ah, the final clue, hidden in plain sight," and with that, the pieces began to fall into place. Poirot studied the slip of paper in his hands, the single word Veritas staring back at him like a whisper from the grave. The weight of it settled in his mind, a puzzle piece that did not yet fit. Across from him, Evelyn Carmichael sat stiffly, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sleeve, the air in the small flat thick with unspoken fears. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Beside him, and Jap, ever the pragmatist, let out a huff. "Well, what do we do with this, then?" Jap asked, crossing his arms. "It's all well and good that Arlington scribbled down truth before he died, but that doesn't tell us who killed him." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Oh, but does it not, mon cher Jap? A dying man does not write at random. He leaves behind what he must, what will be found, what will speak in his absence." His fingers tapped the edge of the paper. "The question is not only what he meant by Veritas, but who he meant to find it." His eyes flickered too. "Evelyn," she met his gaze hesitantly. "You think he left it for me? Or for someone else, mademoiselle?" Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. "You are not the only one searching his study after his death. The real question is, what did they take? And what did they leave behind?" Japp straightened with a grunt. "Well, no sense sitting around speculating. We've got a lead now. Let's get a warrant and search Langley's estate. If Arlington had proof against him, it might still be there." Poirot did not argue, though a small furrow appeared between his brows. The eagerness with which Japp latched onto Langley was understandable, but something about it did not sit well with him. The crime was too convenient, the conclusion too neat. Still, he knew better than to obstruct the official investigation. The moment to press his doubts would come soon enough. Within hours, Scotland Yard had descended upon Langley's estate, armed with warrants and a singular determination to unearth whatever evidence lay hidden within its walls. The industrialist, livid at the intrusion, stood fuming as officers rifled through his study. Japp, ever confident, turned over papers and rifled through drawers with the keen eye of a bloodhound. Then, at last, his hands closed around something file tucked behind a row of books, its edges worn with handling. With a triumphant smirk, he flipped it open. Inside were pages of notes, letters, and financial records, all pointing to a tangled web of fraud, bribery, and embezzlement. And at the very top, in Arlington's sharp, precise handwriting, was the journalist's last unfinished expose. Japp let out a whistle. Well, well, looks like Arlington was onto something. "Langley, you're coming with us." The industrialist's fury was immediate. "This is a bloody setup. I don't know how that got there, but the damage was done." Within the hour, Langley was in police custody, charged not only with fraud, but as the prime suspect in Arlington's murder. The case, it seemed, was solved. The papers wasted no time in declaring it so. Murdered journalist's final story brings down powerful tycoon. Poirot watched as headlines spread through the city, the triumphant cheers of justice served ringing through the streets. And yet, as Poirot sat in his armchair that evening, staring at the fire's flickering glow, the triumph felt hollow. Hastings, ever the optimist, had been in high spirits upon the return, but Poirot had seen it too many times before. The ease with which a case could be declared solved when it had merely been closed. Hastings emerged from the hallway, a brandy in hand, his brows furrowed as he studied Poirot's expression. "I should think you'd be pleased, old chap. We got him, didn't we?" Poirot did not look away from the fire. "Did we?" Hastings blinked. "What do you mean?" "The evidence was there. Langley had the documents. Arlington was about to expose him." Poirot's fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. "We. And yet, mon ami, it is all too convenient. The evidence, it is found precisely where it must be. The motive, it is delivered neatly upon a silver platter. Does it not strike you as strange?" Hastings frowned. "Well, I suppose it is a bit easy, but Langley had the most to lose, didn't he?" Poirot finally turned to face him. "You recall what Langley said, Hastings?" He did not fear Arlington's accusations. He believed Arlington would discredit himself. And yet, suddenly, he leaves behind every incriminating document in his own home. His voice dropped, eyes gleaming with sharp intelligence. No, Hastings. This is not the work of a guilty man hiding his crime. This is the work of someone who needed a criminal to be found. Hastings set his glass down slowly. You think he was framed? Poirot gave a small nod. I think, mon ami, that someone needed the world to believe Langley was the killer. A heavy silence settled between them, the weight of the realization pressing down like an unseen hand. Hastings shifted, uncomfortable. But then if it wasn't Langley, that means Arlington's murderer is still out there. Poirot's voice was quiet. And watching. Always watching. At that precise moment, a knock echoed from the door. Hastings startled, but Poirot merely inclined his head toward it. Hastings hesitated before crossing the room and opening it. Evelyn Carmichael stood in the dim light of the hallway, her face pale, her eyes wide with something dangerously close to fear. In her hands, she clutched another slip of paper, this one far fresher than the one found in Arlington's study. She stepped inside, holding it out. This was slipped under my door an hour ago. Poirot took it, unfolding it carefully. There, scrawled in hurried, jagged handwriting, were 4 words. You're next, Evelyn. Hastings paled. Good Lord! Poirot's fingers tightened slightly on the paper, but his voice remained steady. Ah, and now, mon amis, the true game begins. Poirot studied the note in his hands, his fingertips smoothing over the hastily scrawled threat. Evelyn Carmichael stood rigid, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to ward off an unseen chill. Hastings, still reeling, shut the door behind her, his voice edged with concern. This means the murderer is still at large. And worse, they know we're getting close. Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to Evelyn, who sat stiffly in the chair across from him. Mademoiselle, there is something you have not yet told me. Something from before Arlington's death, from before all of this began. You must think carefully. Is there any connection between Philip Arlington and the people involved in this case that we have not yet considered? She hesitated, glancing toward the note in his hands. I don't think so. Philip had plenty of enemies, yes, but that was because of his work. He was always chasing after corruption, powerful men who had something to hide. But none of them would do this. Poirot's sharp gaze did not waver. Mademoiselle, the mind of a murderer is rarely so direct. Often they do not kill for what is known, but for what is unknown. For a truth that must never come to light. Evelyn exhaled shakily, running a hand over her face. You think this is about something deeper than Langley? Poirot's voice was firm. I think the roots of this crime stretch farther than we have looked. And it is time we unearth them. The fire crackled in the dim room as silence settled between them, each lost in thought. Then, suddenly, Poirot sat upright. Mon Dieu, his eyes gleamed with realization. The name Veritas. It does not simply mean truth. It is a name, a signature. Hastings blinked. A signature? But whose? Poirot stood abruptly, moving toward the desk, where stacks of old newspapers still sat. He rifled through them, his movements precise, methodical, until at last he extracted one from the pile. He laid it out, smoothing the pages carefully. It was an article written nearly 10 years prior. Philip Arlington's byline was stamped clearly at the top, but Poirot's finger traced over the last paragraph, where a single word stood apart from the rest veritas. Hastings leaned in. He signed it with that word? Poirot nodded. It was a mark, mon ami. A signal, perhaps, between himself and someone else. And see here, this article is not about Rupert Langley. It is about a different case entirely. The murder of an industrialist. 10 years ago, Evelyn's breath caught. I remember that case. Philip was obsessed with it. He believed the man's death wasn't what it seemed. But eventually, he had to let it go. No one would listen. Japp, who had been listening in wary silence, finally spoke. Wait a minute. You mean old Richard Harcourt? That case was wrapped up ages ago. The police arrested a suspect. What was his name? Andrew Talbot. He was found guilty. Poirot's gaze darkened. We. But tell me, Japp, who was the prosecuting attorney on that case? Japp frowned, thinking. Then, slowly, his face changed. Good Lord. It was Howard. Silence fell. Hastings looked between them in confusion. You mean the editor? Arlington's friend? Poirot's voice was quiet, measured. Yes, mon ami. The very same. Evelyn shook her head vehemently. No, that doesn't make sense. Howard was the one who published Philip's article. He was trying to help him. Poirot's lips pressed together in thought. Or, mademoiselle, he was trying to control the narrative. To ensure that only certain truths were spoken, he tapped the article once more. This case, it was dismissed by the courts. Talbot was convicted, the matter closed. And yet, Philip Arlington did not let it go. He continued digging. Hastings inhaled sharply. And someone made sure he never got to finish. Japp ran a hand over his face. If you're right, Poirot, then we're dealing with something much bigger than a journalist poking around Langley's affairs. This means Arlington was silenced not because of his latest story, but because of something he had discovered years ago. Poirot nodded. Precisely. And if Arlington wrote Veritas as a signature, it means someone else once used that name too. Perhaps another journalist. Perhaps a witness. Perhaps even. He trailed off, his sharp eyes flickering to Evelyn. She stiffened. What? What is it? Poirot's voice was gentle, but insistent. Mademoiselle, was Philip ever truly alone? In his investigations? Or did he have a partner? She hesitated for only a moment, but it was enough. Poirot saw the flicker of something in her expression, something unspoken, something long buried. Yes, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. There was someone, but I don't know his real name. Philip only ever called him by one thing. Poirot's breath stilled. Veritas. A chill ran through the room. Japp straightened, his entire posture shifting. You mean there was a second journalist? Someone else who knew what Arlington had found? Evelyn nodded slowly. Philip never told me much, only that they had worked together on a few investigations. He always spoke about him like he was a ghost, someone who could get information. No one else could, someone who knew things even Philip didn't. She swallowed hard. But then, one day, he was gone. Philip stopped mentioning him. When I asked, he just said he had disappeared. Poirot's mind was racing. A shadowy figure, an informant or investigator working alongside Arlington, someone with knowledge of something dangerous, someone who had vanished, or perhaps someone who had been silenced. He looked at Evelyn carefully. Do you know when this man disappeared? She hesitated. About 10 years ago, the exact same time as the Harcourt murder case. Poirot exhaled slowly. Then, Mies Amis, we are not just hunting the killer of Philip Arlington. We are searching for a ghost. A man who vanished 10 years ago, whose name, if it ever existed, has been erased. He held up the note Evelyn had received, the 4 words stark against the paper. You're next, Evelyn. His voice was grave as he said, and it seems that the past is not yet done claiming its victims. Poirot turned the note over in his hands, his mind already racing ahead, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that had remained buried for a decade. The name Veritas was no ordinary clue. It was a whisper from the past, an echo of a truth someone had tried to erase. He looked up at Evelyn, who still clutched her arms tightly across her chest, her face pale in the dim light of the room. Tell me, mademoiselle, he said gently, this man, this Veritas, did Philip ever say why he disappeared? She hesitated. Not exactly. I assumed he went into hiding. Philip never spoke about him in detail, but I remember once, years ago, he mentioned that Veritas had found something he wasn't supposed to. Something dangerous, she exhaled. Philip never said it outright, but I always felt that Veritas was the reason he kept looking into the Harcourt case, even after everyone else had moved on. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly against his knee. Curious. A man who disappears without a trace. A name that resurfaces only when a murder is committed. And now, a warning to you, mademoiselle. It suggests that whoever orchestrated this wishes to silence anyone who may hold the remaining pieces of the past. Hastings, who had been listening intently, let out a breath. But how do we find someone who vanished a decade ago? We don't even know if this Veritas is still alive. Poirot's gaze flickered with sharp intelligence. Ah, mon ami, therein lies the beauty of the puzzle. If we cannot find Veritas, then we must force Veritas to find us. Japp, leaning against the mantel, raised an eyebrow. You've got something in mind, don't you? Poirot's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. But of course, that night, a carefully placed story found its way into the newspapers. Poirot ensured that the details were precise, subtle enough to intrigue, yet pointed enough to draw out those who still lurked in the shadows. Murder journalist's final story continues to unravel. A forgotten witness may hold the key. The article, published under Evelyn's name, hinted at a new source, someone Philip Arlington had once trusted. The message was clear. The investigation was not over, and now they waited. It did not take long for the trap to spring. The next morning, as the city stirred awake, a telegram arrived for Poirot. The paper was crisp, the ink slightly smudged as though the sender had hesitated. Tell her to stop. This is not her fight. Let the dead stay buried. There was no signature. But Poirot did not need one. His trap had worked. Someone was watching. Japp cursed under his breath. So, whoever this is, they don't like that we're still digging. Poirot nodded, folding the telegram carefully. We, and more importantly, they made a mistake. They sent this to me. Evelyn frowned. Why is that a mistake? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Because, mademoiselle, if they truly wished to frighten you, they would have sent it directly to you. But they did not. Instead, they reached out to me, the one person who will not be swayed by such things. He tilted his head slightly. Non, this is not a warning. This is a test. They wish to see what I will do next, Hastings exhaled. Then we have to answer, don't we? Poirot smiled. Just so, that evening, Poirot made his next move. He sent a reply to the telegram's return address, a carefully worded message. Cryptic yet deliberate, some truths refuse to remain buried. Veritas knows this better than anyone. Meet me where the story began. Then he waited. The answer came. Sooner than expected. A note slipped under the door of Poirot's flat late that night, midnight. St. James Park. Come alone. Poirot read it in silence, then placed it gently on the table. Hastings, peering over his shoulder, let out a low whistle. Do you think it's him? Veritas? Poirot's expression was unreadable. I think, mon ami, that we are about to find out, Japp scoffed. And I suppose you're actually going. To go alone? Poirot's lips twitched. Do I look like a fool, Chief Inspector? At exactly 5 minutes to midnight, Poirot stepped into the mist-laden shadows of St. James Park. The air was cold, the dampness settling into the cobblestones. A distant street lamp flickered, casting long, ghostly shadows through the trees. Poirot adjusted his gloves and waited. Minutes passed. Silence stretched. Then a figure emerged from the fog. The man was tall, his coat buttoned tightly against the chill, his hat pulled low over his face. He moved with caution, every step measured. Poirot did not move, did not speak. He simply observed the stranger. Stopped a few paces away. You should not have come. His voice was rough, as if disused. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, but I had to. You see, I am not one to let mysteries remain unsolved. The man hesitated, as though considering his next move. Then he exhaled. It's too late to stop it now. Poirot studied him carefully. Who are you? The man's jaw tightened. No one. Not any more. Poirot's voice was soft but unyielding. Veritas. The man flinched, but he did not deny it. Poirot stepped closer, his sharp eyes unwavering. You were Philip Arlington's partner. You helped him uncover the truth about Richard Harcourt's murder. And then you vanished. Veritas said nothing. But Poirot saw the flicker of something guilt, regret before it was quickly masked. Poirot tilted his head. Tell me, monsieur, did you disappear because you were afraid? Or because you were made to? Veritas exhaled. his breath visible. In the cold night air. I disappeared because I had no choice. Poirot's gaze never wavered. Then tell me who took that choice from you. The man hesitated, his hand twitching at his side. Then, finally, he spoke. You're looking in the wrong place. His voice was barely above a whisper. Langley was never the one Philip was truly after. He was just another piece on the board. Poirot's pulse quickened. Then who? Veritas's gaze darted to the shadows behind Poirot. For the first time, true fear entered his eyes. They're already watching, he murmured. Then, before Poirot could react, he turned sharply and disappeared into the night. Poirot stood motionless, his mind racing. Whoever had orchestrated this crime, whoever had silenced Arlington, was still out there. And now they knew that Poirot was closing in. Poirot remained still in the cold night air, the mist curling around him like ghostly fingers. Veritas had disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind more questions than answers. But his words, Langley was never the one Philip was truly after, echoed in Poirot's mind with unsettling clarity. If Langley was merely a piece in a larger game, then who was the true mastermind? And more importantly, why was someone still determined to keep the truth buried? He turned briskly on his heel, his thoughts moving as swiftly as his steps. Hastings and Japp were waiting a short distance away, concealed near the park entrance. The moment they saw him approach, Hastings hurried forward. "Well?" he asked, breath misting in the cold air. "Did he give you anything useful?" Poirot's expression remained unreadable. "Something most curious, mon ami. A warning. And a revelation that we are still looking in the wrong direction." Japp let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Bloody fantastic. Another riddle, just what we needed. You're sure this bloke was Veritas?" "Oh, I am quite sure. But he is afraid, Chief Inspector. Which means our adversary is a most dangerous one." Hastings frowned. "And what do we do now?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "We verify his claim. There is something still hidden, something Philip Arlington uncovered that made him a target. And now we must find it before it disappears forever." With that, Poirot led them back to the car, his mind already formulating the next step. The following morning, they returned to Arlington's flat. The building stood silent, its corridors empty save for the occasional echo of footsteps. Poirot moved methodically, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning every inch of the apartment. He knew, without a doubt, that Arlington had left behind something vital, some final clue that had yet to be uncovered. Evelyn stood anxiously near the desk where Philip had worked. "Do you really think there's still something here?" she asked. Poirot's mustache twitched. Philip Arlington was a man of great intelligence, mademoiselle. He knew he was in danger, yet he continued his work. I do not believe he would have left himself entirely unprotected. Japp, arms crossed, let out a skeptical grunt. "Well, he didn't exactly manage to protect himself in the end, did he?" Poirot shot him a sharp look. "Perhaps not his life, Chief Inspector. But perhaps the truth." His fingers trailed along the bookshelf, pausing at a small, unassuming volume. He tilted it forward, flipping through the pages before stopping abruptly. There, pressed between the pages, was a slip of yellowed paper, carefully Poirot extracted it and held it up to the light. The paper was brittle, the ink slightly faded, but the words were unmistakable. Harcourt was only the beginning. The real name is Poirot's breath caught. But before he could read further, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, sending papers flying from the desk. Evelyn gasped. The window, but Poirot was already moving. The glass pane had been cracked open, not enough to be noticed at first, but just enough for someone, somewhere, to take advantage of it. And at that moment, as Poirot turned back toward the slip of paper in his hand, he saw it a single spark. Then flame, the paper ignited before his very eyes, a thin trail of fire racing across its fragile surface. Poirot moved swiftly, attempting to smother the flame against his palm, but it was too late. The words, "The real name," is vanished in a whisper of ash. Hastings swore under his breath. Evelyn let out a strangled sound. Eyes wide in horror, Japp lunged toward the window, peering out into the alley below. Damn it, someone was here. Someone bloody knew we'd find that paper. Poirot remained still, staring at the last embers crumbling between his fingers. Then slowly he exhaled. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "We were expected." Hastings ran a hand through his hair. "But how? No one else knew we were coming back here." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, but someone is watching." "Always watching." Japp cursed under his breath. "That's it, we need to set a trap for whoever's trying to bury this case." Poirot's expression darkened. "No, Chief Inspector. That is precisely what they want. We are chasing a phantom, and while we grasp at shadows, they are ensuring that every trace of the truth vanishes before we can seize it." Evelyn's voice wavered. "So what do we do?" Poirot's gaze was sharp as steel. "We stop chasing ghosts, mademoiselle. And instead, we force the ghost into the light." He turned, adjusting his cuffs. "Gather your strength, mes amis." The game has changed. The tension in the room was palpable, the charred remnants of the paper still smoldering in Poirot's palm. The truth had been within reach, only to be snatched away at the last moment by an unseen hand. But if someone had been watching them, waiting for the precise moment to strike, then it meant one thing: the villain was not merely covering their tracks. They were controlling the game. Japp slammed his fist against the desk. "Damn it, Poirot. We had the answer right in front of us." Poirot dusted the last of the ash from his fingertips, his expression unreadable. "Ah, mon cher Japp, that is where you are mistaken. We did not have the answer. We had only the final step before the answer. And now our adversary believes they have won." Evelyn's voice wavered. "But they have won, haven't they?" Philip's final clue is gone. Poirot turned his sharp gaze upon her. "Mademoiselle, I ask you, if you were a man like Philip, Arlington chased, threatened, aware that your life was in danger, would you place all your hopes on a single scrap of paper?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No." Philip was careful. He always had backups, exactament. Poirot tapped a finger against his temple. And that means the answer is still out there. A knock at the door made them all start. Japp moved swiftly, hand hovering near his pocket before cracking it open just enough to see who stood outside, a uniformed constable, breathless, his face pale. "Inspector Japp, sir. Urgent news, you're needed at once." Japp's brow furrowed. "What is it?" "It's Sir Hugo Langley. He's dead." The words cut through the air like a blade. Japp swung the door open fully. "Dead? When?" "Less than an hour ago. Shot at close range in his own study. The maid found him just minutes after hearing the gunshot, but the killer was already gone." Poirot's jaw tightened. The game had changed indeed. The drive to Langley's estate was grim. Hastings gripped the wheel tightly, navigating the winding roads with uncharacteristic silence. Evelyn sat in the back, her hands clenched in her lap. Japp stared out the window, his fingers drumming impatiently against his thigh. It was a pattern Poirot had seen before. The moment the investigation came too close to the truth, another life was taken. A carefully placed move by a calculating mind. When they arrived, the grand house was already surrounded by uniformed officers. The butler, pale and shaking, led them wordlessly through the hallways to the study. Langley's body slumped over his desk, blood pooling beneath him, staining the scattered papers. The study smelled of gunpowder and varnished wood. Poirot took in every detail: the shattered glass from a broken decanter, the overturned chair, the ink still drying on a document beneath Langley's stiffening hand. Japp let out a long breath. "Well, that settles it. If Langley was in on it, someone decided he was a liability." Poirot bent slightly, examining the angle of the wound. "Non. This is not the work of an ally eliminating a loose end. This was an execution." Evelyn swallowed. "You mean the same person who killed Philip?" Poirot straightened. "Perhaps. Or perhaps this was the act of someone desperate, someone who believed Langley was about to reveal too much." Hastings frowned. "But how would they know that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because they have been watching us, mon ami. Every step we take, every clue we uncover, it is already known to them." Japp cursed. "We need to check what Langley was working on. If the killer didn't take it, maybe he left something behind." Poirot carefully lifted the paper beneath Langley's hand. The ink was smudged, but the words were still legible. "I was wrong about Veritas. I should never have." The sentence was unfinished, the last stroke of the pen trailing off into nothingness. Poirot exhaled slowly. He was writing this when he was killed. He knew something. And now we must determine what. They searched the study meticulously, examining every drawer, every paper, every hidden compartment Langley may have used. But it was clear someone had been here before them. Japp muttered darkly. Whoever did this wasn't just after Langley. They wanted to erase whatever he knew. Poirot nodded, his mind working rapidly. But there is something they did not anticipate." Hastings blinked. "What's that?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "That I would still be standing here." He turned to Evelyn. "Mademoiselle, tell me, Philip Arlington, did he ever confide in you where he stored sensitive information?" She hesitated. He had a few safe places, but he never told me exactly where. He always said it was better if I didn't know. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then we must ask ourselves, if Philip Arlington feared for his life, where would he place his last hope? Evelyn paled. The newspaper. Japp raised an eyebrow. You think he left something at the London Chronicle? She nodded quickly. If Philip needed a place no one would think to look right away, he'd hide it in plain sight. Poirot smiled. Then, Mies Amis, we must pay a visit to the Chronicle. Before someone else does. As they turned to leave, a constable rushed in, his face grave. Sir, we've found something. They followed him out into the hallway, where an officer held up a small black leather notebook. It was tucked beneath the floorboards, sir. Looks like Langley kept his own notes. Japp took it, flipping it open. The handwriting was cramped but legible. He scanned the first few pages, then stopped. His expression darkened. Poirot, his voice was unusually tight. You need to see this. Poirot took the notebook, eyes sweeping over the page. His lips pressed into a thin line. Hastings leaned forward. What is it? Poirot closed the book with a quiet finality. A list, he murmured, of every person involved in the cover-up of Richard Harcourt's murder. He met their gazes, his own dark with certainty. And it appears that Philip Arlington was not the only one marked for death. Silence settled around them. The stakes had just risen. Whoever was behind this was no longer trying to hide. They were eliminating anyone who got too close. Poirot turned the small black notebook over in his hands, his expression unreadable. The pages within held more than mere names they contained. A pattern, a careful record of actions, meetings, and betrayals. Langley had kept meticulous notes, charting the threads of deception, yet even in death, he had not been able to complete the puzzle. But perhaps he had left them enough. Japp exhaled sharply. A list of everyone involved in the cover-up of Harcourt's murder. That means the killer isn't just covering up one crime. They're tying up all loose ends. Evelyn stepped closer. Her hands clenched. Philip told me once that Harcourt's case was dangerous, that he had uncovered something bigger than expected. If this is all connected, Poirot cut her off gently. Then we must move quickly, mademoiselle. Our adversary is no common killer. They are methodical, calculating. But even the most careful hand makes mistakes. He flipped through the pages, his keen gaze scanning each entry. Names were listed alongside dates, meetings, and cryptic notations. Then he paused. Tiens, he tapped the page lightly. Hear this name. It appears repeatedly. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Lawrence Grimshaw. That name hasn't come up before, has it? Japp frowned. He's the chief editor at the London Chronicle, Arlington's boss. But why would Langley keep notes on him? Poirot's gaze sharpened. That is precisely what we must ask. The drive to the London Chronicle was tense. Poirot sat in deep contemplation, fingers steepled as he reviewed the facts in his mind. The pattern was there, just beneath the surface. Harcourt's murder, the false reports, Arlington's fake death, Langley's sudden demise. And at the center of it all, a journalist who had uncovered too much when they arrived at the Chronicle's offices. The evening rush had begun. Reporters bustled about, the clatter of typewriters and ringing phones filling the air. Poirot moved with purpose, his sharp eyes sweeping the newsroom. He spotted Grimshaw almost immediately, a tall man with thinning hair, his sharp features illuminated by the glow of a desk lamp. Grimshaw looked up, startled by their presence. "Inspector Japp. And Monsieur Poirot, isn't it?" Poirot inclined his head. "Just so, monsieur." Japp wasted no time. "We need to talk." Now Grimshaw hesitated, then gestured them toward his office. Once inside, he shut the door and folded his arms. "I assume this is about Philip Arlington." Poirot studied him carefully. "And Sir Hugo Langley." Grimshaw's jaw tightened. "I heard about Langley." "Tragic." Poirot tilted his head. "We. But not unexpected, I think." Grimshaw frowned. "What are you implying?" Japp cut in. "We have reason to believe Langley was about to expose something that got him killed. And his notes suggest you might know exactly what that was." A flicker of unease crossed Grimshaw's face. Then he sighed. "You don't understand. Arlington was reckless. He wouldn't let it go." Poirot leaned forward. "Let what go?" "Monsieur?" Grimshaw hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Harcourt's death. Philip kept digging, even when I told him to stop. He believed it was a cover-up, that Harcourt had uncovered something dangerous. And then, one day, he came to me with a wild claim that he had proof Harcourt had been murdered to silence him." Evelyn gasped. "He did have proof?" Grimshaw's lips pressed into a thin line. "I never saw it. He told me he had hidden it somewhere safe. A few days later, he was dead." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, we now know he was not." Grimshaw exhaled. "I didn't know what to believe. But then, last night, I got a call. A voice I didn't recognize told me to stop looking for Arlington. That if I didn't, I'd regret it." Japp's expression darkened. "So someone's still pulling the strings." Poirot's mind was working rapidly. The pieces were falling into place. Philip Arlington had faked his death to protect his discovery. Langley had been killed because he got too close. And now someone was still trying to control the truth. He turned back to Grimshaw. "Monsieur, did Philip ever mention where he hid this proof?" Grimshaw hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but I remember he said something strange once right before he disappeared. He told me the truth is always the last thing you read." Poirot's eyes widened. He turned sharply to Evelyn. "Mademoiselle Philip, he kept a column in the Chronicle, we?" She nodded. "Yes, Arlington's ledger. He wrote it under a pseudonym, Elias Grant." Poirot clasped his hands together. "Then we must find his final article." Quickly, Grimshaw led them to the archives, where rows of bound newspapers lined the shelves. Evelyn moved with urgency, pulling out the most recent editions. Poirot scanned each issue, his sharp eyes, searching for the final words of Elias Grant. Then he found it, a short column, buried among the other articles. The past is never truly buried. Ink fades, paper crumbles, but the truth remains. The final page is always the beginning of the real story. Poirot's fingers traced the words. A slow smile formed. "Monsieur Hastings," he murmured. "We have been looking for a hidden document. But what if it was never hidden at all?" Hastings blinked. "I don't follow." Poirot turned to Grimshaw. "Monsieur, I require access to every unpublished draft Philip Arlington ever submitted." Grimshaw hesitated, then nodded. "This way." They followed him to the editor's room, where stacks of old drafts were kept. Poirot moved swiftly, flipping through the papers with precision. And then, aha! He held up a page, his eyes shining. Japp leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" Poirot turned the paper to reveal Arlington's last and published piece. The words were typed cleanly, but at the bottom, scrawled in ink, was a note. "If you are reading this, the game has already begun. The answer lies in the one place they cannot erase, where the ink is set in stone." Evelyn gasped. "Philip must have known he wouldn't get to publish this. He left us a message." Japp frowned. "But what does he mean where the ink is set in stone?" Poirot's smile deepened. "Mise amis. It means the evidence was never on paper." He turned the page over. And there, faintly embossed into the paper, was a set of numbers, coordinates. The truth had been in plain sight. All along, Poirot studied the embossed numbers on the back of the draft, his mind racing ahead, assembling the pieces of the puzzle. The coordinates had been hidden here deliberately, encoded in a way that only someone looking for them would ever notice. Philip Arlington had known he was in danger, but he had left behind a trail, not in plain ink, but in something that could not be erased. Japp took out a small notebook and scribbled down the numbers before turning to Poirot. Coordinates. That means a location. We need a map. Grimshaw, still pale from the revelation, moved quickly to his desk and retrieved an atlas. Flipping to the correct page, they traced the numbers carefully, adjusting for degrees and minutes. Poirot's sharp eyes followed the path, his fingers moving with precision. And then, as if fate had guided them, the destination revealed itself. Hastings frowned. "Good heavens." "That's a graveyard," Evelyn whispered. Poirot exhaled. Softly. "Not just any graveyard, mademoiselle. Highgate Cemetery." Japp straightened. "The one where Harcourt is buried." Silence fell over the room. Poirot tapped the paper lightly. "Do you see now, mon ami? The crime was never about one death, nor even two. It was about something much greater, something that had to be buried, quite literally, with the dead. They wasted no time." The streets of London blurred past as they drove to Highgate Cemetery, the evening air growing heavier with the weight of revelation. Poirot sat still, his eyes closed, deep in thought. He had begun to see the full picture now. The delicate lattice of deception woven so carefully over the years. Upon arrival, the cemetery was eerily quiet. A faint mist curled around the tombstones, lending an unnatural stillness to the air. Poirot led the way, his steps deliberate. The coordinates had pointed to a specific section, a quiet, forgotten part of the cemetery where older graves lay. Untouched by time, they reached the designated spot and Evelyn let out a small gasp. There, standing among the tombstones, was a single monument. Not Harcourt's, but another. A name etched in stone, one that had never been mentioned in there. Investigation, Edmund Ashcombe. Japp rubbed his chin. Who the devil is Edmund Ashcombe? Poirot's voice was soft but certain. A name that was never meant to be found. Evelyn took a step closer, inspecting the dates on the tombstone. Then her breath caught. My God! He died the same year Harcourt was murdered. Poirot nodded. And I would wager, mademoiselle, that he did not die of natural causes. A fresh urgency gripped the group. Poirot stepped forward and knelt beside the grave, running his gloved fingers over the base of the stone. Then, with the utmost care, he pressed lightly against one of the carved letters. A faint click. Hastings stumbled back. What in blazes? Slowly, the front of the monument shifted. A hidden compartment, expertly crafted, revealed itself. Inside, wrapped in a brittle, yellowed cloth, lay a single leather-bound journal. Poirot lifted it with reverence. Philip Arlington's proof. Japp reached for it, but Poirot held it firm. Non mon ami. First we must read. Carefully, he opened the journal, revealing pages filled with neat handwritten notes. It was not Philip's handwriting, but Harcourt's. Poirot read aloud. If you are reading this, then I have failed. But the truth must not die with me. What I have uncovered is not a simple scandal, nor a matter of money. It is a conspiracy buried beneath history itself. They will stop at nothing to silence me, but I cannot remain silent. The truth is written here in these pages. And the name of the one who holds the blade to my throat is. Poirot turned the page and stopped. The next page had been ripped out. A cold silence followed. Hastings let out an exasperated sigh. Well, that's convenient. Poirot merely smiled. Perhaps. But consider, mon ami, the killer had access to this place. They found the journal, but instead of destroying it entirely, they removed only one page. Why? Japp gritted his teeth. Because the rest of the journal didn't incriminate them. Just that one name. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactament. Evelyn clenched her fists. But this proves Harcourt was murdered. He was silenced because he had uncovered something so damning that it was worth killing for. Poirot turned another page. And there, written in Harcourt's careful script, was a single notation that made his breath catch. The Ashcombe files. Japp frowned. What's that? Poirot shut the journal, his expression unreadable. Something that was never meant to be found. Something that TI's Harcourt, Arlington, Langley, all of them together. The crime was not about revenge, nor greed. He paused. It was about erasing history. Japp swore under his breath. And we've just made ourselves targets. Poirot smiled thinly. But of course, mon cher. That was inevitable. A sound behind them, a rustle in the undergrowth. Poirot's hand tightened around the journal. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching. The rustling in the undergrowth was soft, but Poirot's sharp ears caught it instantly. He turned, his head slightly, feigning calm, while his hand gripped the journal with the utmost care. Beside him, Hastings tensed, his instinct to act warring with Poirot's unshakable patience. Japp's hand drifted toward his revolver, but Poirot raised a hand, a silent command for restraint. Then, from the shadows, a voice emerged steady, measured, and devoid of fear. "I must say, Monsieur Poirot, I expected you to be clever, but I had hoped you might lack persistence." A figure stepped forward, his silhouette cutting a sharp contrast against the moonlit gravestones. Even in the dim light, the arrogance in his stance was unmistakable. Lord Langley. Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "Ah, milord, you do me too much credit." Langley's gaze flicked to the journal in Poirot's hand. His mouth curled slightly, as if amused. "So, you've uncovered Harcourt's secrets. Or at least, what remains of them." Japp stepped forward. "You've led us on a chase, Langley, but it's over now." His voice was tight with barely concealed fury. "We know. You were behind Harcourt's death, and Arlington's, and God knows what else." Langley barely spared him a glance. "Inspector, you've spent your career dealing with pickpockets and dockside thugs. This is a game of far greater sophistication than you can comprehend." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but you see, milord, games are something I comprehend exceedingly well." His fingers tapped lightly against the journal's worn leather cover. "And this particular game, how do you say, is at its end?" Langley's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker in his eyes. He was weighing his options. Poirot saw it clearly, the calculation of a man who had always believed himself beyond consequence. Poirot's voice softened, yet his words carried an unshakable weight. "Let us speak frankly, Lord Langley. You're not merely a man who has committed a crime. You are a man who has orchestrated a symphony of deception, played over years, with every note carefully chosen. You are behind Harcourt's death because he uncovered something that could not be allowed to see the light of day." Langley's lips barely moved. "And what, pray, do you believe that was?" Poirot's fingers traced the cover of the journal. The Ashcombe files, a flicker brief, but undeniable. For the first time, Langley hesitated. Poirot pressed forward. "You see, milord, at first, I believed this was a case of simple murder. A journalist threatened, a story buried, a desperate act of silence. But no, this was never about a single death. This was about history itself being rewritten." Japp exhaled sharply. "We know Edmund Ashcombe didn't just die. We know Harcourt uncovered the truth about him. And you silenced him for it." Langley's fingers twitched at his side. Poirot watched him closely. He was nearing the edge, the moment where control began to slip. Poirot took a step forward, his voice now gentle, almost coaxing. "Milord, men like you do not kill for money. They do not kill for personal grudges. They kill for something far greater. Power. Not merely the power of wealth or position, but the power of narrative. The power to erase a truth so dangerous, so damning, that it could unravel everything." Langley inhaled slowly. "You speak in riddles, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, milord. I speak of what you have spent years burying. Edmund Ashcombe was not a forgotten man. He was an architect of deception, a keeper of secrets. And Harcourt, he found the one secret that should never have been unearthed. Poirot let the word settle. Then softly he delivered the final blow. He found out who you really are. Langley's stillness was absolute. Hastings, standing just behind Poirot, felt the weight of the silence stretch impossibly thin. Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. You are not merely a benefactor of the Ashcombe deception. You were the deception. Japp's grip on his revolver tightened. You're saying? Poirot nodded. Edmund Ashcombe did not die that year. He became someone else. He became you. Lord Langley, a sharp intake of breath from Evelyn. Hastings felt his pulse hammer against his skull. Langley stood frozen. Then, very slowly, he let out a soft chuckle. It was neither amused nor defeated. It was the laugh of a man who had expected an ending like this, but had hoped it might never come. Clever, he murmured. Very clever indeed. Poirot's gaze never wavered. You took his name, his title, his fortune, and for decades no one suspected, until Harcourt dug too deep, until Arlington followed. Poirot exhaled. Until now, Langley's shoulders straightened. And what now, Monsieur Poirot? Do you expect me to confess? To crumble beneath the weight of your deductions? Poirot shook his head. No, milord. I expect you to run. A heartbeat of silence, then Langley moved with the speed of a man who had calculated every possible escape route. He turned and bolted toward the trees. Japp cursed, drawing his revolver, but Poirot raised a hand. Non mon ami. He runs not from us, but from the inevitable. Langley disappeared into the shadows, his footsteps fading into the distance. The cemetery swallowed him whole. Japp turned to Poirot. Are you mad? We had him. Poirot smiled gently. He has run all his life, mon cher. Tonight, he will realize that he can run no longer. From the far end of the cemetery, a sharp cry rang out. Then, silence. They ran toward the sound. And there, at the cemetery gates, the final irony awaited them. Langley Edmund Ashcombe lay motionless, collapsed against a broken stone pillar. His chest heaved, his breath ragged. His hand clutched his side-wear in his desperate flight. He had tripped over the very roots of the cemetery. He had once buried his past in. Poirot knelt beside him, his voice soft. Milord, history is a most unforgiving thing. It does not allow itself to be rewritten so easily. Langley let out a shuddering breath. And for the first time, he looked old. Poirot closed his eyes. The game is over. Langley's breath was ragged. His body slumped against the crumbling stone pillar as the weight of a life built on deception bore down upon him. Poirot watched him with an expression that was not triumph, but something closer to quiet inevitability. The chase was over. Japp approached cautiously, revolver still drawn, though it was clear Langley had no fight left in him. Hastings exhaled, rubbing his temples. Well, that's that, he muttered. A man who wasn't who he claimed to be, hiding behind a name that was never his. Poirot did not move. His eyes were still fixed on Langley, and for the briefest moment, Hastings recognized the look. Poirot's mind was still working. Langley let out a weak chuckle, his lips curling in something resembling amusement. "You know, Poirot, I almost regret not meeting you sooner." "You would have been a remarkable opponent." Poirot inclined his head. "Alas, milord, it was not I who defeated you. It was time." "No deception lasts forever." Japp stepped forward. "We'll have plenty of time to discuss regrets." "You're under arrest," Langley sighed, nodding slightly. "Yes, I suppose I am." Poirot's voice was quiet. "And yet, there is something that still troubles me." Hastings felt his stomach drop. "Poirot, surely not." "We've caught him. The case is over." But Poirot's voice remained steady. "No, my friend. Something is missing." Langley's gaze flickered upward. There was something in his expression, something that didn't quite match a man who had lost. Poirot turned to Japp. "Milord Langley is guilty, yes. But of what?" Japp blinked. "What do you mean?" "He's responsible for Harcourt's death, for Arlington's." Poirot interjected, holding up a finger. "But is he?" Langley's eyes met Poirot's. There was a flicker of amusement there, almost approval. Poirot continued, his voice measured. "From the beginning, I have followed the trail of deception. Harcourt was silenced because of what he discovered. Arlington followed the same fate. And yet, mon ami, what did I tell you about this case?" Hastings swallowed. "That it was not just about a single death." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. And that is why I must ask, why would Langley, a man who has hidden in plain sight for decades, suddenly become so careless?" Japp stiffened. "Careless?" Poirot gestured toward Langley. "A man who has successfully lived another's life without suspicion would not need to kill Harcourt in such a direct manner. No, he would have had another do it. He would have ensured that the hands committing the crime were not his own." Langley let out a low chuckle. "You are, of course, correct." Japp's grip on his revolver tightened. "What are you saying?" Poirot's voice was calm. "That Langley is not the killer." A tense silence fell over them. Hastings felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Poirot turned, his eyes scanning the darkness. "No, Langley is guilty of many things. Fraud, deception, the rewriting of history itself. But murder?" He shook his head. "That belongs to someone else." And then a shot rang out. Japp spun, raising his revolver, but the darkness obscured their attacker. Poirot remained still, his head tilting as though listening to something only he could hear. Langley let out a strangled gasp, his body jerking, as a bullet found its mark. "Down!" Japp bellowed, dragging Hastings with him behind a stone monument. The cemetery was suddenly alive with echoes. Shadows twisting under the pale moonlight. Poirot remained in place. Another shot. This one struck just beside his foot, kicking up dust. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm. "You are revealing yourself, mon ami." A flicker of movement. Then Evelyn. She stepped into the moonlight, her face eerily calm, the revolver in her hand still smoking. Hastings let out a strangled sound. "Miss Carrington?" Japp straightened, his face contorted with disbelief. What the hell? Evelyn exhaled, lowering the gun slightly. I suppose there's no point in pretending anymore, is there? Poirot's voice remained gentle. Non, mademoiselle. Langley let out a weak chuckle, blood staining his lips. Ah, so you finally see, Poirot. Poirot's eyes never left Evelyn's. You were the one who killed Harcourt. She nodded. Yes. Japp's face darkened. Why? What the devil? For? Evelyn tilted her head. Because Harcourt was a fool. He thought he could control the truth. But the truth is a dangerous thing. Her grip on the revolver tightened. Langley may have built a lie, but it was my job to protect it. Poirot nodded, as though he had expected this. You were never simply an assistant to Harcourt. She smiled faintly. No, I was much more than that. Hastings felt his pulse hammering in his throat. Then Arlington Evelyn sighed. He became a liability, Poirot exhaled. And now? Evelyn's eyes darkened. Now? I finish what I started. Japp moved, but Evelyn was faster. The revolver snapped up. The barrel trained directly on Poirot's chest, but Poirot simply looked at her, and then, very softly, he said, You have already lost. For a fraction of a second, Evelyn hesitated. It was all the time Japp needed. A single shot cracked through the air. Evelyn's body jerked. The revolver tumbled from her grasp, clattering against the stone. She staggered, her mouth parting in. Shock. Then slowly, she crumpled to her knees. Japp lowered his smoking gun, his face set like stone. You had your chance. Poirot exhaled, stepping forward. Evelyn blinked up at him, her expression unreadable. You knew, didn't you? She whispered. Poirot nodded. It is always the one you least suspect. She let out a weak laugh. Clever. Too clever. Then, with a final shuddering breath, she collapsed. The night was silent once more. Hastings let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good Lord. Japp knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. After a moment, he looked up. She's gone. Poirot simply stood there, his gaze unreadable. The truth, moaned Cher Japp, is not so easily buried. No matter how many try. Hastings. Swallowed. So, it's over? Poirot nodded. Yes, my friend. His eyes flickered toward Langley's still form. At last, it is over, and as dawn began to break over the cemetery, the final pieces of the puzzle settled into place. The morning air was crisp as the first light of dawn crept through the iron gates of the cemetery, casting long shadows over the final scene of the night's grim revelations. The bodies of Evelyn Carrington and Langley remained still, silent proof of the deception and violence that had unraveled before them. The case, at last, was closed, or so it seemed. Japp exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples as he surveyed the aftermath. Hell of a night, he muttered. I'll need to make my report. Won't be an easy one to write. Poirot, standing a few feet away, was deep in thought. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his head was inclined slightly as though listening to an unseen whisper in the morning breeze. Hastings, still shaken from the confrontation, cleared his throat. Well, I suppose that's it then, Poirot. We have our answers. Evelyn killed Harcourt and Arlington to protect Langley's secret. And when the truth came too close, she tried to kill again. Poirot did not respond. Hastings frowned. Poirot turned, his sharp gaze resting on Hastings. Non, mon ami. Something is still amiss, Japp scoffed, exhausted. Amiss? Poirot, we just watched Evelyn admit to murder. She shot at you. What more could you possibly want? Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. To know why, Japp threw up his hands. For heaven's sake, Poirot, she told us why. She was protecting Langley. Poirot's gaze shifted downward toward Langley's still form. She protected him. But for what purpose? Was it loyalty, fear, or something else entirely? Hastings rubbed his temples. Poirot, she's dead. Langley's dead. What? Does it matter now? Poirot straightened, his expression unreadable. Because, mon ami, if I am correct, the true mastermind has still not been caught. A stunned silence followed. Japp's jaw tightened. You're joking. Poirot shook his head. Think, Mies Amis. Evelyn was a skilled deceiver, but she was not the architect of this scheme. She was a guardian, a protector of a secret so valuable that she was willing to kill for it. But ask yourselves who stood to gain the most. Hastings felt a cold. Dread settled in his stomach. Poirot, are you saying she was taking orders from someone else? Poirot's gaze hardened. Japp let out a curse. If that's true, then who? We've accounted for everyone. Poirot raised a hand. Non, mon cher Japp. We have accounted for the dead. But the living. His voice grew softer, almost pensive. There is still one piece missing, A hush fell over the cemetery. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying with it an eerie quiet. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the horizon. His eyes narrowing, Hastings swallowed. Poirot, who? Poirot turned sharply. The one who has remained in the shadows. The one who knew everything, yet never risked exposure. The one who ensured that, no matter what happened, the truth would never fully surface. Japp's expression darkened. Who are you talking about? Poirot's voice was a whisper. The true Langley. A stunned silence. Hastings blinked. What? But Poirot, Langley is right there. Dead. Poirot gave a small, sorrowful smile. No, Hastings. That man was an impostor. A man who assumed Langley's identity decades ago. But if he was an impostor, then where is the real Lord Langley? Japp paled. You don't mean Poirot turned, his voice sharp. I do. A slow, sinking dread crept into Hastings' bones. You're saying the real Langley is still alive? Poirot nodded. Alive. And watching, a sudden gust of wind swept through the graveyard, rustling the leaves. Poirot's gaze flickered toward the towering manor in the distance. The final piece of the puzzle, Mies Amis, is not in the past, it is in the present. We have been chasing ghosts while the true puppet master remains free. Japp's grip tightened on his revolver. Then we need to move. Now Poirot's voice was steady. "We," before he disappears again. And with that, the chase was not over. It had only just begun. The night had stretched long, but now, as the sun broke over the horizon, it cast the first golden light upon the grim stage of deception and murder. Poirot stood apart from the others, his hands clasped neatly before him, his mind still working with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. The case, in the eyes of the world, was over. Justice had been served, or at least a version of it. Japp, ever the pragmatist, exhaled and adjusted his hat. "So, we find the real Langley and put this to bed, assuming he hasn't already skipped town." Poirot did not answer at first. His gaze was fixed on the manor in the distance, as though he could see through its walls, past its grandeur, into the heart of its secrets. "Tell me, Chief Inspector, have you ever wondered why some men disappear, while others remain in the spotlight?" Japp frowned. "What are you getting at, Poirot?" Hastings shifted uneasily. "You mean Langley?" Poirot nodded. "For decades, the world has believed him dead. Yet someone else lived in his place, wearing his name like a mask. Why?" Japp shrugged. "The usual reasons. Money. Power. Maybe. He just didn't want to be found." Poirot's expression remained distant. "Or perhaps he was never meant to be found." The words hung in the air, delicate and heavy all at once. Hastings felt an uneasy stirring in his gut. "Poirot, what are you saying?" Poirot turned to him, his eyes gleaming. "There are two types of men who vanish, Hastings. Those who run, and those who are erased." A chill ran through the morning air. Japp, never one for philosophizing, let out an impatient sigh. "All right, Poirot. What's your point?" Poirot took a measured step forward, his gaze unwavering. "The real Lord Langley may not have vanished of his own accord. Perhaps he was forced into the shadows so that another could take his place. But that kind of deception, it requires careful planning, a guiding hand. Someone who knew the truth, but chose to let the lie continue." Hastings' mind raced. "But that means," Poirot lifted a finger, "that means, mon ami, the mastermind behind this deception was never Evelyn, nor the impostor Langley. No, they were only players in a grander game. The true architect remains hidden." Japp muttered a curse. "And let me guess, you have an idea who it is?" Poirot gave the faintest of smiles. "Not an idea, Chief Inspector. A certainty." The words sent a ripple through the group. Hastings felt the familiar mix of awe and dread whenever Poirot reached the final turn in a case. He had seen it before. Poirot, standing at the threshold of revelation, knowing that once the truth was spoken, there could be no turning back. Japp grumbled. "And you don't suppose you could share with the class?" Poirot inclined his head. "But of course. After all, the time for secrets is nearly over." He turned, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel path as he started toward the manor. Japp and Hastings followed, drawn in by the quiet certainty. In Poirot's step, the wind stirred, rustling through the leaves, whispering secrets they had not yet uncovered, and though the morning sun shone bright, the shadow of another mystery stretched long before them.